Welcome to TGS, Transform, Grow, Succeed. This podcast is about your work as a caring professional and the ideas that we can share to elevate and expand what we can do to ensure that all of those that we serve, without exception, get the best of what we have to offer. My name is Dr. Tim Gravoy, Executive Director of TGS Educational Consulting. I'm excited to introduce Dr. Julia Carlson. Dr. Julia Carlson is a practicum supervisor at Boston College. She has served in numerous roles in education, and most recently as the Vice President of Research Initiatives at Wilson Language Training, working on programmatic impact and the use of implementation science for improving strategic outcomes. In addition, she's been an urban assistant superintendent, elementary and high school principal, and a K-12 special education teacher. Dr. Carlson serves as an education ambassador in her home state of Rhode Island, where she has authored a playbook for schools and districts involved in the turnaround. Her innovative spirit has shaped drastic improvements in school culture and climate while improving student achievement scores, graduation rates, attendance, and decreased suspension rates. Her work with incarcerated youth in Hawaii sparked a mission to create equitable opportunities for all students to reach their maximum potential. And Dr. Julia, did I get that right?
You did, absolutely. Thank you.
Hey, excellent. It's a pleasure to have you on the show. I invited Julia on the show today to talk about, of all things, a checklist. And so I was doom scrolling through LinkedIn, which I probably should find cooler places to doom scroll, but I was doom scrolling through LinkedIn one day when I came across a post where you shared a checklist of commitments a school might make to families. And I'm wondering, can you tell me a little bit more about what that checklist is and how it came to exist?
Absolutely. So first, I want to just send a shout out to all of my friends and family in Maui. Moved here about 10 years ago from the Big Island. And so just want to send a shout out that our hearts are with you in Maui. And yes, so the checklist. So when I first became a high school principal in Providence, Rhode Island, I worked for a school that was chronically underperforming and really had a perception about it, a very negative perception. In fact, my neighbors were horrified when I told them I was going to be the new principal. What I quickly found out was that nothing that people told me was actually true within the building. I'm sure a lot of principals are going to resonate with that comment. We love our babies, we love our teachers, and we're very passionate about what we do. But I quickly recognized that perception is reality, and we really needed to shift what people thought about our school. There was a big push within the district for community partnerships, for parent involvement. And there was a lot of after the fact. So we would send an announcement, a voice recording, but there was really not a proactive strategy that anyone I saw was using. And so I sat with my leadership team who were amazing. I have to say it was probably the best team I've ever had. And we sat down and thought, what could we do to really, before the school year even started, what were those key priorities that we needed our families to know about, and how could we include them in each of these key initiatives that we were going to be performing at the school? So that was kind of the impetus behind the school community walkthrough form. And I posted this out on LinkedIn and made it accessible because leaders like to make things their own. And I'm a big believer in sharing best practices. It's never going to be how I did it, but hopefully other leaders could make it their own in their own ways. So what we did is we took every single month of the school year and we highlighted what were those key initiatives that parents needed to know about, whether it was SAT, whether it was a school community walkthrough, and I'll talk about that in just a second, whether it was an open house, games, who they needed to contact. And we sent this home during our freshman orientation every single year. And we did it in multiple different ways. So the first way, it just went in the packet that your children bring home every school year. And probably as a parent, and I being a parent also did this, you flip through everything, sign, and then send it back.
Beautifully send it back.
So we knew that that was probably not going to be the most effective way. So what we did is we turned it into a magnet that you could just put on your refrigerator. And it came with a little dry erase pen so that each box parents could check off each month and go down the magnet and have what they have participated in, what they have engaged in, so that it was more interactive. This was also on our webpage. And so each month we would highlight each of those events. And then it would also send out robocalls to parents to remind them of additional, another way in order to let parents know what was happening that month. So we really wanted to do a multiple touch points in order to let parents know what was going on. I think one of the big key things that we incorporated, and this was from a former leader in Hawaii that I worked with, Dean Ceballos, is we implemented something called the school community walkthrough. And this was definitely highlighted on our checklist because this was an opportunity for parents, community members, politicians, anybody to actually attend. Each month we had an open house, so to speak, where we would talk about a strategic initiative that the school was engaging in. And then we would actually walk through classes and see it in action. So whether it was a new lab or it was new AP courses, or it was a new EL course that we were rolling out, we could actually see it in action. And this kind of loops back to the whole perception as reality. So for years, this school had been determined as a very dangerous school, a lot of gang activity, very, very, low socioeconomic status, in transition quite often. There were 7 principals in the 2 years before I arrived there.
7.
7. So there was a lot of turnover in transition. And so what we really wanted to set out is to change the perception of the school. And with that came a huge increase in partnerships and parental involvement. And when you have parental involvement, there's 3 things that change dramatically. Number 1, attendance skyrockets. When parents are in the know and they're connected to the school environment, they feel welcome in that school environment in any context that they are currently in. And what I mean by their context is it's not, a certain group of parents, it's all parents. So we would have interpreters at every single school community walkthrough. The parents would get headphones, and so they could engage in the conversation at all times. So attendance would always rise. Number 2, we saw an increase in our ELA and math scores. Parents started to understand when we would have literacy boot camps or math boot camps, and they wanted to get their children more involved. And number 3, we had a huge community partnership initiative in which the school received an exorbitant amount of funding, as well as partnerships in the community. So we were one of the first high schools that were able to convince the district to allow us to bring City Year in, to grow our connections with our students and our students welcoming. So the school, in the 4 years that I was there, saw dramatic increases. We created a new program with the Community College of Rhode Island for first generation college goers. There was just a lot of activities that never would have happened had we not done something as simple as this checklist form to really bring about true change.
So really, what you're talking about is really huge kind of change, huge transformation. We're not talking about, oh, this is just like something you already do. This is easy to implement. This is just a tiny little adjustment tweak. It really was a very massive thing to do, but it was also very important that it boiled down to something that you could put on a magnet on a fridge.
Yes, because it held us accountable. It held the school accountable at all times. We put out what we were going to do, how we were going to support children, how we were going to support families, how we were going to include them into decision making. So whenever we went into strategic planning, parents knew that they could be part of that. And so, yeah, it was a very simple way, but had dramatic implications, through so many different avenues. And that was really, really important, because when we determined what were our 3 main goals, we really made sure that this checklist went back to those goals every single time. And I think that that is what's so important. Is just doing something to do it is nice, but doing it because of a strategic initiative and making sure that it is something that you're constantly revisiting, you're evaluating the effectiveness, you're monitoring it and assessing it. I think that's what's so important.
So I'm just taking a look at a few things that are actually on the checklist right now. So we have, for example, in September, did I receive this academic monitoring checklist? Reviewed my child's academic schedule for the year, received school calendar of events for the year, visited the school's website, emergency contact information. Like all of that stuff is just kind of like in the packet. It goes home. I just did it for my kids, and as we sent them back to school. How does the checklist change? Just the participation in the process.
That's a really good point. So when you get to high school, participation in just filling out forms dips dramatically. One of the big things is our school free and reduced was well over 80%. So this was a school where we needed to ensure that we were getting all this information back. In addition, we had a very high transiency population, homeless population. So phone numbers and contact information was very, very important. And so by having multiple approaches to receiving this information helped us in increasing our return rates. So just sending the packet home in years past had worked for a small portion, but this was also a school that graduated 54% and no one thought that that was a problem. And I was horrified by that fact when I got there. It really felt like that for so many years, people were okay with the mediocrity. And that's not the students that were presented to me every day. They deserved so much more. And I felt like it was our responsibility to meet that challenge. It was not the kids, it was not the parents, which people are very quick to blame. It was our responsibility. And information and transparency to me are two things that need to happen in order to ensure that parents know how to participate with their children's education.
Yeah. And you know what? Let's take a break. And when we come back, I want to talk a bit more about that we want to make sure that parents know how. Because I wonder if, or my hunch is that knowing how is a very big assumption that we make as educators, for sure. Well, let's take a quick break. And when we come back, we will continue our conversation with Dr. Julia just about how checklists can support family engagement. Well, welcome back. We've been talking with Dr. Julia Carlson just about a checklist about the school community walkthrough form. And the whole point of the checklist being to really help parents know not only that the school wants them to participate, but also how to do it. And I'm wondering, Julia, if you talk a little bit more about that, knowing how to be involved in schools a bit. Like how does the checklist support that?
Absolutely. So, I am very cognizant of who I am and where I come from. And I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing, but I definitely did not look like the students at my high school. I did not have the same lived experiences. And so I really had to recognize not only my whiteness, but I also had to recognize, my historical approach to education. And by recognizing where I came from, I took a concerted effort to recognize where my families were coming from. A lot of my families did not have the same experiences in public education. They did not have, an easy onboarding experience. We had a high immigrant population, which was a whole nother ball game. But what I really wanted to do was create a parent panel to really educate myself and my leadership team on what we needed to know and to ensure that parents could become involved. One of the first things that we definitely learned about was being able to communicate in native languages. I unfortunately was not gifted with learning multiple languages. I was fortunate to marry somebody who was, and so really highlighted the importance of the multilingual aspect of communication and how it went out. I think a lot of districts have gotten very good at this, but it can continue beyond just translating it into a different language. The second thing was parents talking to us about why families are so resistant to coming into the school system and how to have open and honest conversations about that. Number one, this was a very volatile time where a lot of our immigrant population or illegal immigrants were worried about coming into the schools for fear of deportation, of information being shared. So we did have a very public notification that went out to our families that our school was a safe place and that politics and schools did not merge. We did not let any immigrant organizations that wanted to do any deportation onto our school facilities, which is actually a legal process.
Not allowed anyway, by the way.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
and so we really wanted to set up clear communication so families knew that it was a safe place and that we wanted them there, not because we were tattling on them, but because we wanted them to help with educating their children. So really, that parental committee was key. Our parents were also from the community and in the community. And so word spread very fast that the big white girl leading the school was actually for real, that she really wanted help. And I was very, very bold in asking for that. I did not have any problem going into the community. I was very involved in a lot of local organizations. I lived in the community. My kids attended the schools. And I let that be known. I let people know that, I don't know and I don't have all the answers, but I needed their help in letting you know how we were going to move forward. And this was all done previous to putting out this checklist, but it didn't end just there. So we would have quarterly meetings where we would check in and ask what was working, what was not working, what do we need to change. We had parents that were very vocal, but one of the key things that happened, this was a high school that had been in existence since the early 20s and never had a parent or an alumni association. And so part of this initiative, we created an alumni association that is still going very, very strong, and even without me. But that created another avenue for not only parents, but former alumni to kind of come back and to give their perspective on, the golden years and why it was golden then and how we could bring that back and just change again. I used to have a vice principal that used to always say, perception's reality. We got to change the perception. And he was very right. And that inclusive, ability to bring parents together was so key for how we decided to move forward.
Mm-hmm. And so you had there's a checklist and it's great, but it emerged out of a very long process of building relationships and doing it just very intentionally and creating space for families to be in and to share what the needs actually are. And that really a lot of times I'm in spaces where we talk about parent involvement, but it's real clear that the educators having that conversation haven't really thought through what they want families to be involved in anyway, and what they would do if the family showed up. What would we even do?
Yeah.
And it's real clear that through that process of listening, that you really have thought that through, that I want you to come in, take a look around in your school, make sure that it's the school that you want to have. That on its own is such a, we're familiar as site principals with how to do a walkthrough. What would a family think walking through our schools? Wouldn't that be amazing information to know? It'd be amazing.
Tim, you bring up a very, very big point on this. So number one, you talked about a long process. It wasn't that it was a long process. It was that it was a needed process that it's scary because you sometimes think that someone's going to give me information and I'm not going to be able to act on that. Mm-hmm. But what I found was it's okay to say, well, we can't do that because of whatever regulations, et cetera, but we can do this. And so that was one of the key things, like parents didn't understand why they couldn't go into their child's classroom. Well, you can't go in to see and observe your child without 48 hours notice to their teacher, but you can go in and observe a classroom from a teacher that has already pre-checked, yes, come into my classroom. And that brings me to the second one. The teacher involvement in this, it's scary. Teachers were willing to open themselves up and have people constantly coming through their classrooms, not for an evaluation, not for an observation, but truly parents looking at what is happening in a classroom. And that started off very scary. We had some very brave teachers that started that. But by the end, the majority of our teachers loved the process because the parents started to talk to each other again and say, hey, I went into your child's classroom and this is what I saw. And this is how we can help the teacher have even more of an impact. And that was a great feeling. And I think it brought the school community internally and externally closer together.
Yeah. So we had that opportunity to have those intimate connections and relationships, but we also balanced it with everybody else's needs as well. That if you're going to plan to teach a lesson, there is some level. I don't want to say disruption exactly, but when somebody walks into your room, there's a change in the energy that happens. Anyone who's taught a class knows that, and getting used to that takes some time. It takes some time, and creating time and space for everybody to grow into that level of bravery and vulnerability, and to kind of experience that. If everybody sees what's going on in my room, it's actually great. It's actually an awesome thing, because then now a different kind of story gets told than the one that perhaps might be in someone's imagination. It might be a little bit different, and so that's really neat. So it's something else that I noticed. It was kind of connected to this idea of making these commitments concrete. There's a door hanger that I saw.
Mm-hmm.
What was that about?
So the door hanger, going back to the very beginning when we were just talking about getting school forms, and phone numbers was one of our biggest barriers. Not having either updated phone numbers, accurate phone numbers, and attendance was a huge issue. Now, I'll remind you, the graduation was 54%. Attendance, roughly daily attendance, was around 72% when I started, which is horrific.
72%?
Yes.
So like 28% of your students just weren't there that day.
Yeah, or most of the year.
Okay, so however it's measured, 28%. That sounds big.
It was big, and it was a very it was very scary, because there's reasons why kids don't come to school, and it's not just engagement. It's not just because of violence on campus, because that's what people would say. But when I was there present, the kids were awesome. I mean, we didn't have we had fights like every high school in America.
Things that schools have,
but it was not an overwhelming majority. It was a small minority, and that was what I saw. And like I said, the perception was what was reality. Kids believed what they said, and what the community said about them. So really, the door hangers came into effect because we had a very targeted initiative that we applied for called My Brother's Keeper, which is from the Obama administration. And it was an attendance challenge that schools were taking on to improve attendance. And like most things in my life, I jump in head first and I'm like, we're doing this. And so at the beginning of the school
here we go.
At the beginning of the school year, I used to have all of my admin team pick a student that lived right on the border where bus transportation was no longer provided. So you had to live 2.5 miles, I believe, or further away in order to receive bus transportation. And every year I'd have them walk to school with these students. 2 miles is a long walk through a city and urban district. And I'm not even talking about if it's raining or if it's snowing.
Yeah.
And so part of this, we started to get from the kids a lot of information about why they were not coming to school, what was going on. And a big issue was we had a lot of multi-generational families, and the master bell schedule for the district was really not conducive. So high school would start first, but what we didn't recognize is a lot of our high school students were responsible for taking their younger siblings to middle or elementary school. So we recognized that a lot of our families, they didn't have a choice. They had to be at work. And so there was requirements. So we ended up changing our master bell schedule, much to the district's dismay, so that we could actually create an opportunity for kids not to miss key content areas. That was not a very popular decision that I made, but it did have huge implications down the road. And the second thing is that we recognized is that when you go and you knock on someone's door, oftentimes people don't answer. And it's not because they're afraid, it's because maybe they are at work or they are sleeping because they did the night shift.
Or they don't know you.
They don't know you.
They don't know you. So why would they answer the door for you?
Exactly.
So, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I love it that you're highlighting, like it's not personal.
No, it was not. And it wasn't because they were a bad parent and they were trying to avoid us. That was not the case. So we created something very, very simple. It was a door hanger that just said, sorry, we missed you. This is who I am. Call me at this number, and what we wanted to talk about. And what we wanted to talk about was always on the backside. So maybe it was, tardiness, behavior, and it was just literally a checkbox.
Yeah.
And it was a very, very simple way, because we just ordered them en masse and you just wrote right on them to just pop it on the door. Now, we had attendance officers that prior to this just made phone calls all day long. And what we did is we put them in the field. So we gave them the flyers, told them just go visit the houses. Oftentimes people would answer. The kids got very used to Mrs. Carlson at the time showing up at their door saying, you got to come to school. And it did. It's the small things. Now, this was a large school, not compared to where I grew up, where there was 5,000 people in my high school. We had about 1,000 kids in our school, but it was very needed because, again, it was this small minority that was having huge implications on the school as a whole. The initiative was highly successful. We were awarded one of the top improved high schools in America and sent to the White House to meet Obama, who actually got sent to the Middle East because we were targeting a very, very bad man at the time. But we were able to be awarded and honored in the White House, which was my first time, for our efforts. And it wasn't really just me. I mean, this was such a team effort. I told you on the checklist at the very end, we used to put all of our guidance counselors, their information by grade, and then the administrator that was over those grades. And this was a very coordinated team effort. We had, dashboards with students and knew exactly where every student in our building was at all times. And I can't tell you how important that was.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's what I'm struck by and what you're describing is that yes, that what you're talking about involved a lot of people and was a very heavy lift. This wasn't a small amount of work that you're talking about. This wasn't an itty bitty thing that required just a little bit of commitment and you could just go about the rest of your day without thinking too much about it. And to a certain degree, you did boil it down to the simplest possible thing. We're going to go to where the person I want to talk to is. If they are there, great. If they are not there, I'm going to let them know why I knocked on their door and give them the easiest possible way to get in touch. And at least from the how to execute the strategy perspective, that part you did make as easy as possible for everybody involved to implement. There was a school that I worked with recently that was struggling with attendance, and the intervention that we worked together to provide for that was, hey, you have basically this empty homeroom because nobody's there. Maybe you could use that time to call the students that aren't there and just let them know you miss them and invite them to come back tomorrow. Like you could do that. And you just took a look at the data and here's your poor attendance and it's just going up like that. And just the day that the phone call is made. And we're now, I'm not saying that it didn't take time to make those calls. It sure did. It meant that, yes, instead of teaching, we were phone calling. But if no one's there, no one's there.
No. And it's a mind shift, So, a lot of, in my experience, my 22 years in public education, it is a mind shift. I remember way back when being like, well, if the kid doesn't want to be here, fine, then they're going to fail. And I encountered teachers who still had behaviorals and attendance as part of their grading policy. And I think that is such an antiquated philosophy. And there has been such a shift in public education, and we are the ones that are so far behind. And to me, it's very easy, small things that if you just looked at it from a different perspective, you could have such substantial improvements in your school community. And you would have students and parents that felt like they were a part of something and were welcome to be a part of that. And I think that it's really that mind shift that this is not always just as easy as saying the kid just doesn't want to be here. Like we have to really kind of drill down to what are those, extenuating circumstances? What are those root causes? And root cause analysis is difficult, but we have to continuously ask why. Well, why is that happening? And when we get to the why, I think that's when we really can make true change.
Yeah. Well, let's go ahead and take one last break. And I'd love to have, just because we covered a lot of ground today. And so I'm wondering, just when we come back, if you're thinking about those site leaders, those principals, those assistant principals who are thinking, wow, my attendance is just horrible. It just is absolutely horrible. My parent engagement is minimal. I can't do anything to get a family to come in and show up. What would you want them to do first? And then what would you want them to do first? All right, let's take a break.
Thanks.
Well, welcome back. Dr. Carlson, it's been absolutely great to talk to you today. And so given all of the ground that we've covered with making really big mind shifts boil down to things like door hangers and checklists, I'm wondering what final thought you might have for us. So if I'm a school leader, a site leader, assistant principal, someone who's at all in charge of these kinds of things at my school, what seems to be first in making this kind of change happen?
Absolutely. And thank you, Tim, for having me. This has been wonderful as well, just for me to kind of think through, how I want to move forward. I would say the same thing that I always say to leaders that I mentor and I have coached over the years. Number one, you need to be really strategic, and you need to pick 3 goals, only 3. And you need to wrap everything that you do around those 3 goals for that school year. I really feel like we are designed to be firefighters in our schools. We are constantly putting out fires, and that can become overwhelming in all you ever do if you don't have a strategic plan that's going to navigate you through that school year. So I would say first and foremost, pick 3 goals, 3 main goals, whether that's attendance, ELA, math, science, culture, climate, whatever it may be, pick 3 and then wrap everything that you do and strategically plan all that you do around those 3 goals. That's very, very important. I think the second thing is then you need to backwards map that out. So where do you want to end at the end of the year? And be realistic, but also be bold. It's super easy for us to say 2% increase, but really, is that going to get you to where you need to be? And then when you backwards map, you need to tie in all of those things that you're going to do throughout the school year. Simple things, checklists, door hangers, walkthroughs, home visits, whatever it may be, what you're going to do each month so that you can then, and number 3, you can monitor and assess the effectiveness of your plan throughout the school year. I think just like in standardized testing, we wait till after the fact to evaluate the impact, and that never changes anything. For true turnaround, you have to consistently investigate, navigate, look at what you're doing, and really be honest with yourself. Is this working? Let's take it off the table. This is working. Let's embrace that and go forward with that. And you have to lastly, you have to involve others. And what I mean by that is this. I always recognized when I was not the smartest person in the room, but I always surrounded myself with people that knew a lot more about that goal than I could. I needed to lead an entire building. I did not need to be an expert in everything, but I did need to make sure I surrounded myself with the experts. And that was often students, parents, teachers, community members, and you have to be modest enough and you have to be grounded enough to say, I am not the know-it-all, because principals, we are know-it-alls, and that's good. But you have to be able to know when you don't know it all and welcome people in to help collaborate with you and partner with you and shepherd the mission forward.
Well, that's absolutely beautiful. Just amazing to think about that, and kind of a relief, as I work with many schools where their strategic plans have 87 million goals. They just have 87 million, and every single one of them is the principal's responsibility, all the way down to the kindergarten teacher and their paraprofessional. And it's just truthfully,
unrealistic.
It's just unrealistic to do, and it's just absolutely unrealistic to do when we think about all of this, all of those kinds of things. So, yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show today, and just thank you for sharing your experience with our listeners. And to our listeners, I hope you enjoyed our show, and I hope you reach out to me or to Dr. Julia with your thoughts in our conversation. You can find Dr. Julia Carlson on their LinkedIn profile, and I'll put the link into the show notes below. And you can find me at www.tgseducationalconsulting.com. And if you're a school leader working on a family engagement strategy right now, I would absolutely love it if you would drop a comment below and share more about your thoughts on this journey too. But until next time, may you have as many opportunities to be as good and generous with yourself as you are with those that you serve.